Alara had always felt like the shadow in her own home. While her younger sister, Vivian, floated through life with effortless charm, she was constantly reminded that she existed on the periphery. Their parents had a way of praising Vivian for every little accomplishment, showering her with gifts, attention, and encouragement, while Alara's achievements were dismissed as not quite enough. The final blow came on a cold spring morning. Their parents called them into the study, a ritual that had once felt important but now seemed foreboding. Vivian was giggling, twirling her hair, completely unaware of the storm about to break. Their father, a man whose pride was rivaled only by his stubbornness, cleared his throat. "Vivian, we've decided to help you pursue your studies in Paris. We're giving you $80,000 to cover tuition and living expenses." Vivian squealed, throwing her arms around their father. Alara's heart sank, her stomach twisting into knots. At first, she thought it might be a shared opportunity, an investment in both their futures, but then came the words that would scar her. "And Alara," her mother said, her voice cold and detached, "you don't deserve any help." The words hit harder than any slap. For a moment, Alara couldn't breathe, couldn't even comprehend the cruelty. She had spent years excelling in school, working part-time jobs to save up for her own ambitions, and still, according to them, she was not worthy. The room, once familiar and safe, felt like a cage closing around her chest. Vivian's laughter rang in her ears, oblivious to the storm inside her sister. Alara left the study without a word, walking through the garden as tears blurred the view of the sunlit roses. Every step felt heavy with betrayal. She had loved her parents fiercely, trusted them implicitly, and yet they had made a public declaration that she was unworthy of support, unworthy of love. The rejection was complete. That evening, sitting alone in her small bedroom, Alara made a decision. She would no longer ask for validation from those who could not see her worth. She would not plead, she would not beg, and she certainly would not rely on their approval or their money. If they wanted to limit her, fine, she would rise anyway, on her own terms. The fire of determination burned within her, fueled by pain and a desire to prove herself, not to them, but to the world that had always underestimated her. The next morning, she packed her meager belongings, sent a brief note explaining she was leaving, and stepped into the unknown. She carried no resentment for Vivian, only a quiet resolve. She would make her way in the world, not as their daughter, but as Alara, the woman who refused to be diminished. As the city skyline welcomed her into its chaotic embrace, she took a deep breath, feeling both fear and exhilaration. The path ahead was uncertain, the road difficult, but for the first time, she felt the stirrings of freedom. Her parents' rejection, though bitter, had given her something invaluable: clarity. And in that clarity, she found the first glimmer of power, the power to carve her own destiny. Alara's first steps into independence were far from glamorous. The city she had once admired from afar now felt like a vast labyrinth, each street a reminder of her vulnerability. She found a small, sparsely furnished apartment that smelled faintly of damp paint and old carpet. Her savings, though modest, had to last longer than she thought possible. Every decision was weighted with the knowledge that there was no safety net, no parental bailout, no golden ticket waiting for her. The first few weeks were grueling. She worked long hours at a cafe, her hands raw from endless scrubbing, her voice hoarse from serving customers who barely acknowledged her existence. At night, she returned to her apartment exhausted, nursing sore muscles and bruised confidence. She sometimes wondered if she had made a mistake leaving home, if her dreams of independence were naive. The city seemed indifferent to her struggles, but Alara refused to give in to despair. She reminded herself of her parents' words, "You don't deserve any help," and turned their cruelty into fuel. If they had underestimated her, she would prove them wrong. It was during one long, solitary evening, sitting on her creaky bed with a cold cup of tea, that Alara realized she had talents her family had overlooked. Numbers, strategy, and ambition had always been her strengths, yet they had been dismissed as practical, but not exceptional. She began studying financial markets late into the night, poring over books, online courses, and articles. Every free hour was spent learning, analyzing, and planning. Her cafe wages were meager, but she invested what she could, slowly building a foundation for something larger. The work was lonely. Friends from her past were distant, unaware of the struggles she faced, and she refused to burden anyone with her fears. Yet in the silence, Alara discovered a profound sense of self-reliance. She became disciplined, meticulous, and patient. Each small financial victory, a successful investment, a freelance project completed, a debt paid off, was a quiet affirmation of her capabilities. Vivian's life in Paris, with its effortless luxury, was a distant echo that no longer triggered envy. Instead, it became a benchmark, a challenge she was determined to surpass. Despite the hardships, Alara never lost her sense of dignity. She refused to compromise her values for temporary comfort, declining offers that promised money but demanded ethical sacrifice. Every obstacle she faced strengthened her resolve. She began to understand that success was not measured by parental approval or societal recognition, but by the freedom to live life on her own terms. By the end of her second year, the fruits of her perseverance began to emerge. She had saved enough to invest in a small portfolio, started consulting for local businesses, and her reputation for intelligence and reliability quietly spread. Alara's life was no longer defined by her parents' rejection but by her own effort and determination. Each day was a reminder that she was capable, resilient, and unstoppable, a force that required no validation from anyone else. The struggle had been bitter, but it had forged something stronger, a woman who could face the world alone and emerge victorious. The fire that her parents had tried to extinguish now burned brighter than ever, illuminating a path toward a future that belonged entirely to her. And in the quiet moments, when she looked at the skyline from her modest balcony, Alara allowed herself a small, secret smile, knowing that her journey was only just beginning. Years of relentless work, sleepless nights, and sacrifices began to bear fruit. Alara had transformed from a struggling young woman scraping by in a cramped apartment into a formidable force in the world of business and investment. Every decision, every calculated risk, had been a step toward the life she had envisioned in those early, lonely nights. Her portfolio had grown beyond her wildest dreams, and her reputation for integrity, intelligence, and vision opened doors she had once thought were forever closed. She remembered vividly the sting of her parents' rejection, the coldness in their eyes, and Vivian's delighted laughter when she first received the $80,000 for Paris. Those memories, once painful, now fueled a quiet but unshakable sense of power. Alara did not crave revenge in the petty sense, she was not the type to ruin lives or humiliate anyone, but she craved the satisfaction of living so fully, so brilliantly, that their earlier judgments would seem absurd in retrospect. When Alara purchased her $5 million mansion, she did it without fanfare, with no announcement, no public declaration. To her, it wasn't just a home, it was a monument to her resilience, a tangible proof that she had risen despite being told she was undeserving. The mansion overlooked a serene lake, its grand windows catching the sunrise like liquid gold. Each room reflected her taste, her success, and the hard-earned freedom that money alone could not buy. Yet Alara's triumph was not defined solely by wealth. She had cultivated friendships with people who valued her for who she was, not for what she could inherit or provide. She traveled, learned, and immersed herself in passions she had once thought out of reach. Her life had become full and meaningful, a sharp contrast to the carefully curated, shallow comfort of Vivian's Parisian existence. The first encounter with her past came unexpectedly. She was hosting a small gathering at her estate when, through the wrought iron gates, she noticed a familiar figure, Vivian, walking with their father. Vivian stopped abruptly, staring at the house, her mouth slightly open, her eyes wide with disbelief. She pulled out her phone and called their father in a trembling voice. "Dad, why does she have that?" Alara watched quietly from the balcony, a soft, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. There was no gloating, no rush of cruelty, only the sweet, quiet justice of her life speaking for itself. Her parents' pride and favoritism had never earned them respect, it had only delayed their realization that Alara's worth could not be measured in favors or allowances. In that moment, she understood the essence of her revenge. It wasn't money or status that mattered, it was the undeniable proof that she had not only survived but thrived. She had built a life so rich in success, independence, and self-respect that it could not be ignored, denied, or diminished. Alara turned from the balcony, letting the moment pass without comment. Her story was no longer about the pain inflicted by others, it was about her triumph over it. Every sleepless night, every struggle, every moment of doubt had led to this, a life she owned entirely, a life that reflected her strength, brilliance, and resilience. And in that ownership, she found something far sweeter than revenge, she found freedom. It happened on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the golden light filters through the trees, making everything appear both familiar and unreal. Alara was tending to her garden, her hands deep in the soil as she pruned roses that bloomed as brightly as her ambitions. She heard the faint crunch of tires on gravel and looked up. Through the iron gates, she saw a car slowly pull into the driveway. Her heart did not race, her breath did not catch. This was not a moment of fear or anxiety. She recognized the familiar figure immediately, Vivian, flustered and pale, clutching her phone, their father beside her, stiff and uneasy. It had been 4 years since she had last seen them. 4 years of independence, growth, and hard-won triumph. Vivian's eyes widened at the sight of the mansion. She stepped out of the car, almost hesitant, as if she could not believe it existed. Her hand trembled as she held her phone to her ear, dialing their father. "Dad, why does she have that?" Her voice cracked, laced with disbelief and panic. The question was both literal and symbolic, as if the very walls of Alara's success challenged everything she had ever believed about life and fairness. Alara stood silently on the balcony, watching the scene unfold. There was no anger in her heart, no desire for humiliation. She did not need Vivian to grovel, nor her parents to beg for forgiveness. Their shock, their confusion, and the silent realization of their misjudgment were punishment enough. For years ago, they had told her she didn't deserve help. Now, the universe, in its own ironic justice, had done what they never could, it had shown them her worth. Their father's face turned pale, a mixture of guilt and disbelief. He opened his mouth, unsure of what to say. Words stumbled out awkwardly, half excuses, half shock, but Alara did not respond. There was no need. She did not owe them an explanation, nor validation, nor forgiveness on demand. She had lived, struggled, and triumphed on her own. That truth was more eloquent than any words could ever be. Vivian's eyes lingered on Alara for a long moment. The arrogance she had carried for years, the certainty that privilege and parental support were the ultimate keys to success, had dissolved in the quiet realization that her sister had surpassed her in ways she could not touch. Vivian's sobs were muffled by the phone, but Alara felt no satisfaction in them. Instead, she felt the serene power of a life fully claimed, a destiny fully earned. As they drove away, Alara remained on the balcony, gazing at the horizon. She thought of the nights she had cried alone, the struggles that had seemed insurmountable, the countless moments when the world had told her she was less than she deserved. And now, looking at the life she had built, she smiled, not with malice, but with profound peace. Her parents' favoritism had failed to define her. Vivian's effortless path had failed to limit her. The true triumph was not just the mansion, the wealth, or the status, it was the knowledge that she had remained true to herself, unbroken, and unstoppable. Alara had become more than they could ever imagine, more than they could ever control, and that was a victory far sweeter than any revenge. In that quiet victory, Alara finally felt complete. She had cut off the chains of the past, claimed her own life, and shown, without a single word, that worth cannot be given, it must be earned. And she had earned it, beautifully, fully, and entirely on her own.